What's up everybody, it's Spencer from Pixel and Bracket, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a square in Adobe Photoshop. We're going to begin with a new document, and I'm in Photoshop CC 2018, as you can see right here, which means my workspace is the Essentials default workspace, which essentially has the Properties panel over here. There's a few little changes, but not a whole lot, and it doesn't really matter because in this tutorial we're going to make some square shapes, or rectangle shapes really. So I'm going to grab the Shape tool down here, and the Shape tool is actually the U shortcut key. And if you click and hold that, you'll notice there's lots of other shapes you can create with that same shortcut key, but we're going to focus on the rectangle tool. So when I select that, there's a lot of properties up here at the top. I can select the tool mode, whether it's shape, path, or pixels. I'm going to stick with shape. And we can select whether it's a fill or a stroke, or fill and stroke, the size of the stroke, and a few more options along the way. Well, what we're going to do is create a couple squares. And notice when I click and drag, I can create a rectangle with the bounding box. But if I hold shift, it's going to lock that into a perfect square. And all I have to do is let go, and it's created a square with the fill that we originally selected. And now you notice it actually created a shape layer over here. So we have an entire layer dedicated to that shape. And check out the properties. Live shapes are super cool. So there's lots of live shape properties, which means I can link the width and the height, and I can change that on the fly, like 350 pixels, hit enter, and it changes the size of my shape to be 350 by 350. Or you can unlink that and make it back into a rectangle rather than a square. You can change its positioning. You can change even whether it is a stroked shape or a filled shape in these properties. And then you have a lot of stroke options, like the size of the stroke. We could change that to 20. You can change whether it's a dotted line, just solid line, or where the stroke appears, you know, in the center, on the outside, the inside, also the edges and the corners. And speaking of corners, we can actually round the corners of our shape right here with these live shape properties. One other thing we can do is we can use the direct selection tool, which is normally the path selection, this dark arrow in our toolbar over here, but if we click and hold, it'll give us the direct selection tool. With that tool, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the corner rounding there. With that direct selection tool, I can actually select just one point, and I can click and drag that point to edit my shape. But beware, there's certain actions that you do when I try to do that. Adobe Photoshop's going to let me know this operation will turn a live shape into a regular path. Do you want to continue? If I say yes, I no longer have my live shape properties over here. So all those little rounding corner things and the, changing it from a fill to a stroke, although I can probably still change it from a fill to a stroke based on my active layers up here. However, remember, there are some actions that will get rid of the live shape properties. That's something I've run into before, and I know a lot of people have run into that, where they can't figure out where that menu went, and it's the properties menu. So under window, you go down to properties. That's where the live shape properties will show up as long as you have it selected. But there are certain actions that you can do, like when you edit or directly edit some of the points, that will get rid of it. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. One other thing we can do is we can actually transform our shape. So if we grab the selection tool and we hit Command or Control T, the transformation bounding box shows up, which means I can stretch and skew this shape, and I can hold shift to lock it into the square shape to make it bigger or smaller. And once I do that, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes this will switch to the masks instead of the live shape. So I didn't lose my live shape. You can still get back to that live shape mode by clicking live shape properties if you see it. If you didn't get that dialog box earlier that warns you it'll get rid of them. So sometimes it'll be on this mask and it'll look like you don't have your shape anymore, but if you just click on this sort of bounding box looking icon, you'll get that live shape properties back, which means we can switch it back and forth to a filled shape or whatnot, and change the corner radius, and we can even edit the corners individually if we unlock. Of course, it's not letting me do that, but looks like if we can edit these, so like one corner is 0 pixels, now you know that's 45, 45, 45, and 0 down here. There's different ways you can edit those corners, and generally you can unlock them by clicking this icon. There we go, it went away now. And you can change each one of these corners if I expand this panel to be whatever you want it to be. If you want one corner rounded more than others, you can edit those individually, or you can edit them all together. Well, that's it for this tutorial. It was actually a little bit longer than I thought. You know, there's a lot of different options in Photoshop I want to make you aware of that I wasn't aware of when I was first learning Photoshop. So if you're making shapes, if there are shape paths or shape layers, they are vector so that you can scale them up and down as long as you keep them as shapes. You won't be able to necessarily draw straight on that. So if I switch to my brush tool and I tried to brush right over it, you already see there's a little crossed out icon, which means when I click, it's going to tell me it needs to rasterize it. Rasterizing means it's going to turn it into pixels, so it will no longer be vector. So when I scale it up and down, it's actually going to lose some quality while I do that. So if you want to paint on a shape layer, I would recommend just creating a new layer above it, and then you can paint on top of that. You know, there's lots of different ways to work with Photoshop. Learn your layers. If you're new to Photoshop, I've got a free course in the description. It's like 5 essential tips in Photoshop for beginners, which are 5 things that I think that if you're a beginner, you should really know and really be aware of. And in fact, if you're not a beginner, I still think you need to be aware of them. There's some great non-destructive editing techniques available in that course. Just click it. It's in the description. Anyway, thanks for watching, you guys. Subscribe for more tips and tutorials, and I'll see you next time.